everyone, we are here to continue our story. Who was Stan Lee? We are on chapter 2. Here's the picture. Alright. In 1939, when Stan was just 16, he graduated from DeWitt Clinton High School. Many kids his age were thinking about college, not Stan. He needed to keep working. With the help of his cousin Gene, he got a job at Timely, a publishing company run by Martin Goodman. Mr. Goodman barely knew Stan. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Goodman asked Stan when he showed up for work. Was Mr. Goodman joking? Had Jean forgot to mention Stan to her husband? He never got a chance to find out. He was too busy. Timely published more than 24 magazines out of its Manhattan office. Some feature adventure stories set in the Old West. Others were about science and health. Stan was assigned to Timely's comic department. Some departments, Stan joked. It was Joe and Jack. Joe was Joe Simon. He was the top editor. The man was in charge of all the words on the page. Jack was Jack Kirby. He was the best artist at Timely. These two men were big influences on Stan, but they weren't friendly. When Stan first arrived, they barely looked up. In those first days on the job, Stan worked as a gopher, somebody who does whatever the boss needs. Though he was paid only $8 a week, Stan didn't mind. He was proud to be working at Timely. Stan commuted every day from Bronx down to Timely's office on 42nd Street. The room Joe and Jack worked in was nothing special. Jack would sit at his drawing board. Joe would pace around the room. Stan sometimes joked that he couldn't see them through all the cigar smoke. At that time, there was a fierce competition from other comic book companies. DC Comics had created Superman and Batman. Timely's two superheroes were less famous. The Human Torch was an android created in a lab, and he had the power to shoot fire from his hands. He could suddenly burst into flames. This is another insert of how comics are made. But he could not always control those flames. The submariner had an even bigger problem. He was the son of a human sea captain and a princess from Atlantis. He didn't seem to like humans at all. In 1940, Joe Simon and Jack Kirby created Captain America for Timely Comics. World War II was raging in Europe, and Simon and Kirby were horrified by what they had heard about Adolf Hitler. Captain America's mission was to fight the Nazi Germany. He wore red, white, and blue costume, the same colors as the American flag. He carried a shield that could stop bullets. The first issue was a huge success. It sold 1 million copies. Superman had competition. That's when Stan got the chance to do more than answer phones. One day, Joe Simon called Stan over. He asked if Stan would be able to write a story for a new issue of Captain America. Stan was thrilled. He continued to tell he turned in a story called Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge. Nobody said much about his first story. Stan didn't mind. All that mattered was that Stan got assigned another story right away. After the Traitor's Revenge, Stan began to write more. As he wrote, Stan decided to use a pen name instead of his real name. He considered headliner, hunter, foreign correspondent, Stan Martin, and even Niels Nat, which was almost Stan Lee spelled backwards. Stan didn't want to use his full name, Stanley Lieber. "I was saving that for a great novel, an American novel," he joked later, "which I never wrote." Finally, he settled on a permanent pen named Stan Lee. Both his names cut in half. Chapter 3. The Teenager Takes Over. As Stan was assigned more writing jobs, Joe and Jack were assigned fewer. Mr. Goodman could be difficult. He didn't like to pay the artists much. They were not happy about it, so Joe and Jack decided to quit. I looked around to see who would replace them, and I realized there was nobody. Stan said later, I was the only guy there. Stan had a lot of ideas for stories, but couldn't draw well, so he worked closely with the artists. He also continued as the company's editor, though sometimes it was hard to be an 18-year-old boss. Some days Stan would answer the office door and be asked, "Hey kid, where can I find Mr. Lee?" For about a year, Stan ran timely and wrote whatever Mr. Goodman wanted. He wrote westerns, mysteries, and horror, and even some romance stories. As much as Stan loved his job, he was distracted. The United States had been entered World War II, and Stan wanted to do his part. He decided to volunteer for the Army and report for duty in the winter of 1942. Here is an insert about World War II, in case you did not know what that war was about. Stan's military classification was playwright because of his work experience. Stan was given a job writing slogans, manuals, and training films for the U.S. government. This was a rare assignment. Only 8 other people have been classified as playwright by the U.S. Army, including film director Frank Capra, novelist William Soronin, and Theodore Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss. Remarkably, Stan kept working for Timely while he was in the Army. The company would mail Stan ideas, and he would send finished stories back to them from wherever he was stationed. As much as Stan liked serving his country, he was thrilled when the war ended in 1945. He couldn't wait to get back to the world of comic books. And that is the end of Chapter 3. Thanks for listening.